Wow, dude, new YMS merch? Suspicious. Get yours at ymsmerch.com. Thank you. So I just saw Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, and it was good. I remember seeing the original Mad Max trilogy quite some time ago. I was definitely in my teens, and although I definitely enjoyed elements of those films, they didn't really connect with me all that much. Fast forward to 2015 and Mad Max Fury Road comes out, and despite some criticisms, I had a lot of fun with that film. I wound up rewatching it recently in preparation for this newest film, and I feel pretty much the same as when I first watched it in theaters. There's some really great looking shots, some very impressive practical effects and stunt work, a mostly fun energy, engaging and interesting setups for conflicts. It's not a perfect film, but it really works. There's a lot of dumb, fun action, but I do really wish that the characters were a bit more fleshed out, and this wouldn't really be an issue if the film never took itself seriously, but there are quite a few moments of implied dramatic seriousness, and along those lines, I really wish that the music choices were a bit more appropriate and consistent. For the most part, there's a kind of fun and exciting, but relatively unserious and a little bit campy score that really helps with the energy of the film. But again, there's points in the film where the tone of the music just really heavily implies this super serious, dramatic, epic tone. This is especially an issue for me during scenes in which the music is drowning out and overpowering the actual environmental sound design. I honestly feel as though this scene would have functioned much better without any music at all. Like, they just drove into this storm. There is a huge wasted opportunity for some really impactful atmospheric sound design here, but they instead prioritized the music, which was going for a really super serious, dramatic, epic tone that I don't feel works really well with the movie, personally. And while we're talking about sound design, there are so many points in this movie where characters are just whispering to each other, even though it's implied that they're in a huge vehicle that should be making a lot of noise. When they're not talking to each other, you can really hear the engine because it's supposed to be loud and powerful, but then when they're whispering to each other, it's like they forgot that the engine made noise when they were filming it, and so then in post they had to just make it so that the engine wasn't making noise.
You don't have to do it just because he tells you.
What choice does she have?
He's not gonna hurt us. He needs us.
Why?
It's really inconsistent, and it was really distracting for me. Still, like I said, this movie is overall very impressively filmed and a lot of fun. There are a lot of fun choices. It is delightfully cheese at points as well, although honestly, sometimes the cheese is not delightful. It doesn't quite hit the same levels of cheese satisfaction as something like a Sam Raimi film would for me, but I understand why a lot of people love this movie. 7 out of 10. My rating has not changed since I first saw it. Now with Furiosa, a lot of people watched the trailer and thought it looked bad, and although I could definitely see that some shots looked pretty CG, I didn't think the trailer looked terrible. As a person that really enjoyed Fury Road but didn't think it was a masterpiece, I figured I wouldn't be disappointed as long as this movie was just fun, and it was, but it also wasn't, but it was. So I bought my tickets for the IMAX screening, and shortly before the actual show date, I realized that this movie is 2.5 hours long, which immediately made me less excited to see the film. Fury Road was only 2 hours, and it didn't really seem like there would be an extra 30 minutes of just action. And I was right about that, but to my surprise, the non-action scenes in this film were actually a lot better than the non-action scenes in Fury Road. Unlike Fury Road, the characters in this film are actually much more well-developed and properly fleshed out. The main character of this film was actually really interesting. We spend enough time with her and we know enough about her that it doesn't just wind up becoming another one of those silent, stoic lead character tropes. Seeing so much more of the journey of this character, especially from such a young age, gave me so much more to be invested in. This is a much less campy and cheesy film that aims to be much more serious than Fury Road, but its attempts at seriousness actually work really well. Now, this film is split into 5 chapters, and the first chapter is honestly incredible. If the entire movie was like the first 2 chapters in this film, it would honestly be at least an 8 out of 10 for me. It is super atmospheric, it has a great tone, it is intense and super well shot. Now, despite Anya Taylor-Joy appearing on the poster and most of the marketing, she doesn't actually show up until almost halfway through the movie. For the first hour of the movie, we follow the same character but at a much younger age, played by a much younger actor. And honestly, Elila Brown did a really great job. Seeing a good child performance is a really rare thing, so I'm honestly really happy about that. The first chapter of this film had some really great conflict, and it also did a really great job of thoroughly exploring the different potential scenarios within a conflict. It was super well executed, loved the tone, loved the resource management, loved almost everything about it. Chapter 2 is when I started noticing that the effects in this film were a lot less practical than Fury Road, but I was still really enjoying it, and much of it felt as though it was at least stylistically appropriate. Like, sure, it's less believable in terms of feeling as though they filmed people doing a thing, but it didn't feel any less realistic in terms of me believing it in the context of the story. It still felt as though the characters on screen were doing a thing. I should also mention that Chris Hemsworth was fantastic in this movie. He got quite a lot of screen time and his character was very entertaining to watch. He tackles the comedic performance very well and he's got a really great screen presence. I also really loved the sound design and music choices in this film. I don't remember there being any point where I was distracted at characters whispering to each other in allegedly loud environments, so if that even happened in this film at all, it did not happen very much. I also really loved the music choices in this film. It was going for a very different tone than Fury Road, but it never felt conflicting with what was being shown on screen. It was subtle when it needed to be, it was present when it needed to be, and there was never any point where it took away from the atmosphere or overpowered other sound design choices. Now, as soon as Anya Taylor-Joy showed up in this film, it became a lot less interesting to me, and it's not really her fault or anything. I just found the younger version of her character to be so much more interesting for the conflict. Having an actual child trying to survive in this environment brought an elevated sense of stakes and peril. It just felt much more dark and intense for me. I felt less engaged following a character who was just kind of a badass, and maybe this had more to do with what was actually shown in each scene and also the film's runtime, but the third and fourth chapter of this film were just kind of exhausting for me. There is a huge action set piece in the middle of this film that lasts for about 15 minutes, and I've talked with some people who considered this to be the highlight of the film for them, but unfortunately my experience with this scene was me just being kind of zoned out. A lot of things were happening, and some of these things felt kind of impressive. Like, it's still very well orchestrated despite it not feeling very real, but it kind of felt as though I was watching a Wachowski movie where there was an overload of things happening on the screen, but I wasn't super attached to or invested in anything happening. I remember the weird-looking little person or child. I remember that. There were some people in the air. Wasn't really glued to the screen. There's some really not great-looking CG fire in this movie. It just felt kind of exhausting to me, really. And without spoiling anything, I really love the last chapter of this film. The way that this film ends is super emotional and impactful. It is thought-provoking. It's really appropriately handled and feels like a great conclusion to an actual action epic. I just wish that there wasn't such a long amount of time of me feeling relatively uninvested before we got to that point. I really love that this film tried and succeeded to be very different than Fury Road. I'm really glad it was its own thing, and pretty much every issue I had in Fury Road was not an issue in this film. And despite me absolutely loving so much about this film with a particularly incredible first chapter, my lack of investment for most of the second half of this film really does drag it down for me. Perhaps it could have been shorter, or maybe just handled differently, I'm not really sure. Still, I really do not regret watching this, and I would recommend it. So check this one out if you want, and if you are going to see it, I would recommend seeing it in theaters. And I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It's closer to a 7 than a 5. Another film I saw is The Last Stop in Yuma County. This is the feature-length directorial debut from director Francis Galuppi, who is now also writing and directing a new Evil Dead movie. This film is executive produced by Jim Cummings, who also stars in the film, and it's his inclusion that really put this film on my radar. Jim Cummings directed a few films that I've recommended on this channel before. Thunder Road is pretty fantastic, so check that one out if you haven't seen it already. Anyway, this film is a fun, intense crime drama thriller with comedic comedic sensibilities. Much of this film feels like an homage to Quentin Tarantino, which is pretty amusing that we've gotten to this point because Tarantino's own works are so heavily homage-oriented. This film is set in the 1970s, which honestly really helps the plot because otherwise people would have cell phones. But it also lends itself very well to the stylistic choices made in this film. The opening title font is very retro. There's a really great music choice near the beginning of the film that reminded me of Italian composer Stelvio Cipriani, if I pronounced his name correctly. He's one of my favorite composers. It's very nostalgic for me. Love the energy, love the vibe, love the harpsichord. It's a really great tone to start this film off with, and also I should mention Stelvio Cipriani's music has been featured in Quentin Tarantino films. This film is very well shot, and I love that there's a healthy variety of how things are shown. High angles, low angles, close-ups, wide shots. There's some really great long takes in this film, and when they're used, it feels actually purposeful instead of just random and show-offy. I really love the decision not to cut to the other characters reacting when he's giving them orders at gunpoint. It feels unique, and it really helps with the tension and uncertainty of the situation. I really love watching a film with a great sense of framing and cinematography, because so many other films out there just keep recycling the exact same A and B shots throughout the entire movie with the exact same framing and distance, etc. I really love watching a film where the visuals don't feel stale, and this especially helps with this film because the majority of it takes place in one location. This is a very dialogue-heavy film with great characters, great dynamics, and great setups, although don't go into it expecting an actual Quentin Tarantino movie where people are gonna have random conversations about Big Kahuna Burger and feet. Oh yeah, there was a foot shot in this film. That was definitely an homage. In ways, it feels like a lot of these characters would belong in the Tarantino-verse, but it still manages to be its own thing. Each character and each actor has a really great screen presence. The film is very well cast, with each person doing a great job for their role. Jim Cummings was appropriately cast as the nervous and unconfident knife salesman, and I was also really impressed with Michael Abbott Jr.'s performance. This is the same actor that starred in The Death of Dick Long, directed by Daniel Scheinert, a hilarious film that I love more and more each time I watch it, so check that one out if you haven't seen it. Anyway, I found myself really impressed with his character acting abilities. He's really able to distinguish the characters he plays through both vocal and physical performance. I'm about halfway through season 1 of Fallout right now, and I honestly didn't even know that was him in episode 2 until after I saw it. The differences between how he performs each of these characters is sometimes subtle, but very effective and very distinct.
Hey, why don't we sit in the front seat this morning?
You head to Philly?
What's Philly?
Town.
Yeah, well, her mom is not doing so well.
Oh, damn. Well, I wish I would have said something now.
No, it's best that you didn't.
Great performances all around, honestly. And the performances in this film are really helped by the thoughtful character writing. You could really tell that there was actual thought put into how characters would react in a certain situation. There's several points in the movie where I was really appreciating just how realistically characters were reacting to certain conflicts. I really love the choice for this character to avoid eye contact during this shot. It feels very natural and believable, and it just adds so much to the scene. There's also some really great sound design choices in this film. It's set in a very hot and sweaty diner with no working air conditioning, and they use the noise of the rattly fan on the counter to really elevate the tension in some scenes. I love the idea of taking something diegetic and using that to help elevate the tone in a scene. There's also some really great editing choices in this film. Not only are there some great transitions, but there's one editing choice that is just so delightfully self-aware that I won't spoil, you'll just have to see the movie. It's great. I love watching a movie that knows what it is and is confident about what it's showing. It is a 90-minute long film that is short and sweet, but very fun and very satisfying. There are moments in this film that really caught me off guard in a very fun way. There are clever tie-ins and callbacks that are also very satisfying. This is honestly just a great movie, and I didn't really have many issues with it at all. There were two characters that the film introduced that initially felt kinda off, but that was honestly only temporary, and they really worked for the film overall. This is a genuinely fantastic directorial debut, and I'm honestly kind of hyped for his new Evil Dead project whenever that comes out. This was a super enjoyable experience. I had a blast watching it. If you want to watch it along with me, you can go to my watch-alongs channel. I did a live reaction to it. It was great. Jim even showed up in the comments near the end. Oh, hey! Jim's here! Jim's here in the YouTube chat. This is fucking dope, by the way. Awesome movie. Definitely check it out. And I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Thank you. Dude, new YMS merch. John! Get me out of here! Father, get yours at ymsmerch.com. Thank you.